Welcome, welcome. It's amazing to see you. And you know, I do a lot of things in terms of my work, and I don't know if there's anything that I get more excited for every year than this workshop. This How to Write Online workshop is in many ways the ultimate distillation of my entire career as a writer, as a creator. And what I do is I spend my life trying to figure out how to write online, how to become a citizen of the internet for myself, and then teach it to others. And I do that through my course, Rite of Passage, and I do it through this workshop. This workshop is the ultimate distillation of everything that I've learned now in about half a decade of doing this. Half a decade of reading and writing and thinking and having conversations, all distilled into this 60-minute session. And I love this because there's so much fire. You're going to see the chat explode, and you're going to see this, what it looks like to have, we have 3,000 people who have registered for this workshop, and you're going to see what that fire feels like today. I'm going to talk about how to write online and go through really 3 different points of focus. And what this is it takes the different things that we talk about in Rite of Passage and it distills them into how to write online for anybody. And so, like Will said, this is what it's like to be a student in Rite of Passage, give you a little taste of that, really focusing on 3 different points of focus when it comes to ideas. The first being ideas, the second being writing, and the third being audience, and audience building in particular. And one of the things that I noticed when it came to writing is that, well, we got a little problem because most people, they're just hacking things together and figuring things out as they go. And so when I was in college, I really wanted to impress all my friends. And so I had to have a really good sound system. And I had a roommate, his name was Walker. And so talking to Walker one day, and he goes, dude, my grandpa has this sound system. I will sell it to you for $125. And at the time, that was like so expensive. This was like a big purchase. And he gives me his grandpa's old sound system. And it's got all these speakers that I need to set up. I got to go on Amazon. I got to buy speaker wire. I got to cut it. I got to strip it. It always breaks down. The system doesn't really work. And throughout my entire college career, I'd have friends over in my room, and the speaker system, it would just break down because I couldn't figure out how to set it up. It was all stitched together with duct tape. And I get so frustrated. And after I graduated, I ended up getting a Sonos, like Wi-Fi enabled, super clean, super crisp. And this is actually exactly how I think about what I'm trying to give you today. You have speaker system wired up, grandpa's old system, all hacked together way of thinking about writing and thinking about what it means to be a citizen of the internet, how to actually use the internet to make your life better, both socially, personally, emotionally, and professionally. And what this is I spend my life basically creating a Sonos system for this. That's fun to use. And guess what? The Sonos sounds a hell of a lot better than my old speaker system with wires ever did. So you get both ease and improved quality. And that begins with ideas, but how do you actually improve your ideas? Well, you need a note-taking system. This is where we want to begin. And this is a way for us to save and store and organize and collect information. And that begins with the capture habit. So as you go about your life, you have books and articles and personal notes and social media and web pages that you're reading. You are consuming all of this information. But where are you saving it? What are you doing to make sure that you're squeezing the juice out of the fruit of all the information that you're consuming? So with books, when you're reading Kindle and on iBooks, do you have a way to automatically save, store, and capture those ideas? How about articles? How about personal notes? How about social media? How about web pages? And what you see on the sides here, articles, books, social media, web pages, these are other people's ideas. And then personal notes, they're at the top because they're your own ideas. And what we need is we need a system to capture both other people's ideas and our own. And I want to start by talking about how do we actually capture other people's ideas. And there's 4 things that we really want to save. Ideas that are useful, easily lost, personal, or inspiring. And what we do is we're like hunters, moving through the world, scavenging the world for ideas, for new ways of explaining things, for new ways of seeing the world, for new ways of communicating our expertise and learning. And when we come across these ideas, we want to save them. You know, I think of information as food, and as we move through a supermarket, what we're doing is we're trying to find healthy food, things that are nutritious. And likewise, as we move through the world, we're looking for nutritious ideas that are going to make us smarter and in better shape, and that are going to help us live better lives. And so we want to capture ideas. And there's really 3 different platforms that I recommend you start with. The first would be like ebooks. Do you actually have a system, a way of saving the best ideas that you find from ebooks, Kindle and Apple Books, online articles, Instapaper, if this, then that, web pages, you can use Liner. And what I recommend is signing up for a platform called Readwise, where you can save all of these ideas. And in Rite of Passage, what I do is I have a 45-minute lecture, basically, where I go into how do you save every single kind of information very tactically. So that what you can do is you can capture the best of what you've read. You can have it all saved in one place for the rest of your life. What an unbelievable idea. That rather than consuming once and relying on your memory, which is fragile, to just save ideas, what if you could actually save them on your computer, which doesn't forget things? And what you find is that as you save ideas, and as the number of notes that you have increases linearly, the number of connections you can make between them increases exponentially. And so what you have a linear increase in notes and an exponential increase in connections. And so now we get on this compounding curve that gives us a huge competitive advantage in work, in our creative abilities, and in life. So that's how we capture other people's ideas. But how about capturing your own ideas? How do we think about that? You know, one thing that you can do is that you can write while you read. So very often, you know, I'll be reading Kindle and I'll be looking at a book. So this is from a book called Out of the Crisis, and I'll just start highlighting. I'll highlight, and all of a sudden I'll pop in and I'll say, you know what, this is actually fresh in my mind. And now what I do is I just type in the note what I'm thinking about. I can write a paragraph. I can just write a little note about, you know, what am I thinking about? And as I was reading this, I was actually talking about, it's very meta, but how when you read a book that you don't like, this sort of relates to manufacturing from this book, it means your quality filters aren't strong enough. So now I can go back through my Kindle highlights and boom, I have that right there. Once again, I have an idea once. It's saved in my note-taking system for the rest of my life. And guess what? You can do the same thing with articles too. You can read something and then all of a sudden you can pop in, you can write a note. And very often I'll be reading, I'll write entire paragraphs. And because it's fresh in my mind here, when I actually sit down to write, I now have these paragraphs, and my writing then becomes a process of assembly. And I'm actually writing while I'm having the great ideas instead of waiting till I'm sitting down looking at a blank white screen, and then I get writer's block. And I talk more about this in a YouTube video that I recently did called Building an Idea Factory. And, I think of a lot of these things, like basically creating a digital diary when it comes to saving our ideas and the things that we're experiencing, the life that we're living. And, Matthew McConaughey just came out with this book called Green Lights. And it's one of the best celebrity memoirs I've ever read. I was trying to figure out why, like, what made this book different? What made it so exceptional? And I know for a fact that it wasn't ghostwritten like so many of the others. He actually wrote it. He went into the desert for 53 days solo, and he poured his heart out on the page. But how was he able to remember his life so well? He must have had a competitive advantage. And the answer is that when he was 15 years old, he started writing a journal. And he had more than 4 decades of ideas collected in a central place. And he would write ideas down. He'd write about his experiences. And so the things that other authors would forget, he would remember. But he didn't just write down ideas. He also collected photos and bumper stickers and little sayings. And so this is what we want to do as we go and we create our note-taking system. This is what then makes writing better. We have this instant accessibility to the ideas, the images, the experiences that matter most to us. And so as I go through my life, I just collect experiences. This was me and Will Mannon in this same office a couple months ago, and we reshot every single pre-recorded video for Rite of Passage. We wrote 51 pages of scripted instruction, and we turned it all into videos. This is for my college graduation. Got to have that one saved, right? And here's a photo with my sister from when I was a kid. I want to save all these things, This is the stuff that's going to make your writing rich, not just because you can use it in your writing, but because of the memories that it inspires. And one little cheat code that you can do is, as you're walking home after an experience or something, I used to do this in New York all the time. I'd have a good dinner. And one of the fun things about living in New York is you have this forced time to just reflect and digest your food, because you go from a restaurant and then you got to take the subway home, and there's always a walk. So, on average, you got maybe a 10-minute walk to the subway, 5-minute walk home after that. And so as I was walking, I just got in this great habit where I'd sit down, or I'd really be walking. I'd open up my phone, this app called Otter. They have amazing voice transcription. I just talk about what I was thinking. And so many of my articles actually begin with me talking rather than with me writing. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple minutes. And so as you begin to save your own ideas, there's some questions that you want to ask yourself. What stories, what are your go-to stories that you tell all the time? What makes people laugh? What makes people say, that's a good story? The things that captivate the people in your life. What are things that are insightful? And what ways do you surprise your peers with the knowledge that you have, with the things that you say? And memories. What's a memory that you don't want to forget? Or experiences, right about once in a lifetime moments. And then you save these ideas when you find them. The thing that you realize when you're a writer is that you really don't have more good ideas than most people. That's what everyone thinks. You know what the difference is? You actually save the good ideas that you have, and you learn to recognize them. And so if you can save, you can capture ideas with this note-taking system, you're way better off. A couple years ago, I was having dinner with a friend at my favorite burger joint in New York called Corner Bistro out in the West Village. And we were sitting down, and he was working for an investment bank or something, really didn't like his job. And the way that he talked about how he didn't like his job, it was so insightful, so illustrative of the modern moment. And I got back on the subway, just like what I was talking about. And I said, you know what, that was such a deep conversation. And the lossiness of memory decays so fast. Things that are instantly clear to you after an experience 3 months later, you just don't remember things. You don't remember the way that somebody's eyes wiggle as they tell you something. You don't remember the way that they sort of splatter ketchup all over their fries and their burger right before they tell you something deep. You don't remember the way that somebody looks away from you and sort of takes a deep breath before they tell you something that's really profound. But that's the stuff of good writing. And so you got to capture those ideas right away. And so that's what I did. I was coming home and I said, you know what, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to write out everything. And I go in, I talk about how he explained how the school system told him to follow rules, obey orders. I talk about splattering the ketchup, the company's human resources department, the specifics that actually take an experience on the page and make it come alive. And a couple months later, I put those ideas in my article, Peter Thiel's Religion, which is probably the most successful article I've ever published, been read hundreds of thousands of times. And people specifically requested that I spin out this section into its own article because they said, how did you write like that? What did you do? And I told them, I didn't write like that. I just was able to get to a place where either through speech, I can collect ideas, or just by getting on the train and just jotting ideas down while it's fresh. And meanwhile, everybody else is thinking that I remember this from months later. It's a cheat code. And then I go out and I go on YouTube. I do a 3-part documentary on Peter Thiel, 60 minutes, and boom, this is one of the central pillars of the most popular video that I made. And so this is the stuff that we're focused on in Write a Passage. But now let's talk writing. You know, modern writing, it isn't created, it's assembled. And yesterday, actually, I was listening to an interview that a friend sent me. And he said, you gotta listen to this, man. It's fantastic. This guy, he has an unbelievable writing process. He really understands creativity. Ken Burns, one of the great American storytellers, who's created some of the best documentaries in the history of television. So the interview starts, and it was one of those interviews where they start off before they actually get into the meat of it, even get into the introduction of the interview. They start off with that little clip that the producer captures and just says, this is the best part of the interview. So I'm all excited and stuff. I start listening to Ken Burns. I couldn't believe what I heard. Ken Burns, his 11.5-hour Civil War documentary was culled from 22.73 miles of film. So he's doing the equivalent of note-taking. He's building up a huge arsenal of ideas, and he's culling them. And he lives in New Hampshire, and he says, you know, it's a lot like maple syrup. You know, the way that maple syrup works is that in order to create 1 gallon of syrup, you need about 50 gallons of sap. And so the problem is the way that most people write is they sit down to start their articles. They got no sap. They got to start from the beginning. That's like starting a losing position. You got no shot. What Ken Burns is doing is he has a system for collecting these ideas, for moving through them. And then he actually thinks of the creative process as much of one of subtraction and removal and distillation and compression, just like from going from sap to syrup. And you end up with that sweet, sweet sugary syrup. But now, in order to collect all these ideas, in order to write prolifically, in order to live the life of a writer, one of the things that we got to do is we need a system for, rather than thinking of writing here and life there as these things that are entirely separate, what we do is we actually fuse the two. And our life inspires good writing, and good writing then inspires life. And that comes from the content triangle. And this is a critical idea in what it means to be a modern creator. Because writing doesn't have to happen alone. It can be a collaborative process. And in the mid-19th century, Henry David Thoreau, he went to Walden Pond. And what did he do? He said, I'm going to escape society. I'm going to not talk to anyone for 2 years. And I'm going to sit down. I'm going to think about the meaning of life. And I'm going to write this book. And this is how people think about writing, that you can either write or you can live. You can either work or you can think. You can either be a doer or a creative. And I am challenging that assumption. You can do both. But you need a system for doing both. And that is what I call the content triangle. And so it begins with conversation. And why conversation? Because conversation is the thing that we're already doing in life. We go out, we see friends, we talk to friends on the phone. Mom calls, she says, "How are you doing?" You're talking to people at work. You're exchanging emails back and forth. There's conversation that is moving through your life all the time, but most people think of it as something that's totally superfluous. And I'm trying to say, what if your best ideas are emerging there? Because conversation is tinder for the flame of epiphany. And so you start with conversation, something that you're doing anyways, and you have a good conversation. Like last week, I was talking to a friend, going on a walk in my backyard, and it's close to this really nice trail. And so we're on the trail and we are having this conversation about sort of the nature of entrepreneurship. Man, it gets really interesting. I'm having all these epiphanies, all these ideas that I've never had before. And so I go on Twitter and I share the idea. And all these people say, "Oh, that's fairly interesting." And at least even for me, like a bunch of people responded. And even early in my writing career, I'd do the same thing via email. I'd go in and I'd pop into my newsletter back when I had less than 1,000 subscribers. And that was fun because I'd get so many good responses. It was a very, very dynamic and sort of conversation with readers that was a lot like dialogue. And so people would respond to good ideas and they'd let me know, "Hey, that was pretty interesting." So I start with conversation, something I'm already doing. I share, I get some feedback. And then I say, "Oh, actually, that's pretty interesting. Now I'll write an article about it." Just yesterday, I published an article about what social media networks whisper, basically. You can go check my Twitter, top tweet or something. And that came from me having a bunch of conversations in the last week with a bunch of people who said, "Hey, that's actually a pretty good idea." And so as I had conversation, I was forced to structure and refine my ideas. I got feedback, not through writing in this isolation on the page, but just through normal living my life, having conversations, telling people about my ideas. And all of you can do this. And so now what I'm doing is when I share an article, this is in some way like the 5th, 6th, 7th version of that idea, rather than the first version of that idea, which is costly, right? You are sitting down at your computer when you're writing, you can't do anything else. Can't be with people. You got to block off that time. It's exhausting. It's draining. And so what you can do with conversation and by sharing ideas is you basically develop ideas away from the page where most of writing happens. And once you sit down, rather than saying, "Okay, now I'm going to start thinking about this idea," you get in and you go right to publishing. And then you go from publishing emails to publishing articles to then maybe eventually publishing a book. And that book ends up being not the first draft of your thoughts, or the article not the first draft of your thoughts, but rather something that you've worked your way through. And as you do this, don't forget about voice transcription. One of the things I think about is in football, there's this thing, it's called the 2-minute drill. And it's a very sort of exciting time. There's a lot of pressure. And what I do is when I have an idea and I'm not quite sure how I want to write about it, I pop right into Otter and I just force myself to structure the idea. And I start thinking, how can I explain this idea in 2 minutes or less, the entire thing? And what it does is, what you do when you're talking is you're taking advantage of thousands of years of evolution. Because humans are so good at talking, we're better at talking than we are at writing. Writing was only invented in the 16th century with Martin Luther or with Gutenberg. Writing is a relatively recent phenomenon. It's no accident that it's hard for us. And so what we can do is we can actually talk about our ideas, get them down on the page through talking. And then what we can do is we can transport them to the page, and like Ken Burns, see writing as a process of subtraction, distillation, deletion. And for a lot of people, this, for me at least, removed my writer's block. And, there's a writer, I think he was number 4 or something on the New York Times bestseller list last year. His name is James Clear. And he wrote a book called Atomic Habits. It's now sold more than 2 million copies. This is the book on habits. I mean, this book is going to be the number 1 recommended book on habits for decades to come. Outrageous success. And he actually used the content triangle to write this book. Unbelievable. So what did he do? So he basically says that he wrote articles about habits for 5 years that inevitably came from conversations at the beginning. Then he emailed short articles every single week. Then he learned, refined, and improved his ideas. Then he compiled them into book form. Then he used the audience that he created along the way to launch the book. And then had that email platform. And boom, good ideas, email platform, which we'll talk about. That's how he says the book became so successful. It's exactly what we're talking about here. And it works. All of you can do it. And what you realize when you write, when you think, when you're trying to develop ideas is that you don't need to be 100% original. You know, another best-selling book, I think this one sold about 12 million copies. It's called Sapiens. And a lot of people read this book and said, oh my goodness, this thing is life-changing. Bill Gates, Barack Obama recommended it highly. I think it's their favorite book of the year, 2018 or something. And Yuval Noah Harari in this interview, he says, I thought this is so banal. There's absolutely nothing there that is new. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not a primatologist. I mean, I did zero new research. I was really just reading the kind of common knowledge and just presenting it in a new way. And so many of us, as we write, we try to say, oh, but none of these ideas are 100% mine. But that pressure of 100% originality, I mean, it's nonsense. That's not how ideas work. We borrow, we copy, we improve, and we build upon others with credit, of course. And that is how, as the project of human civilization, that's how we progress. You know, even with Winston Churchill, all these people say, oh, my ideas need to be 100% original. I need to write about things that no one's ever written about before. And yet there are 1,010 biographies of Winston Churchill. Nonsense. Get that out of your head. But then how do we actually improve our writing? What do we do? Well, let's talk about some of the myths of writing education. We've spoken about some of these before. You know, you got to write in solitude. You got to be like Thoreau. Escape society. Don't talk to anyone. Leave. Go just be alone for however long you need to publish this big ol' article, right? No, you don't need to do that. That's not a practical solution in the modern life. And that's how we're kind of taught to write. Then we're taught to write in this academic prose with these fancy words that might help us do well on standardized tests, but people don't understand them. We don't even talk about publishing. I mean, we go through how many years of school and how many things they do end up publishing through school. Publishing is the best part. You know, it's like people in school expect you to just write for one person, the teacher, for all these years, and then expect you to somehow love writing after that, when the big benefits of writing are actually getting your ideas out in public so often, because that's then how you improve your ideas. That's how you then create serendipity for yourself. That's how you then build businesses, make friends, and actually improve your thinking. We're going to be talking about publishing, and then scarcity, that we don't actually have the ideas that we need to have because we're not taught to build note-taking systems so that we can write from abundance. And so what we do in Write a Passage is we take this list of 4 and we just invert them. We flip them on their head and we say, you know what? Not only that, but we're going to focus on simplicity. We're going to be immensely practical, because complicated rules paralyze people. Simple rules empower people. And so when it comes to improving our writing, I just keep things very simple. So I'll start off with things like clear sentences. Every sentence, when you're editing, just do these 5 things and your work will be better. I'm telling you 5 things. Clear, create a rhythm. So I'm going to talk about that in a second, but you want a certain rhythmical sound to your writing. And I'm going to get to that. You want to link your sentences. You want to make sure that every sentence that you write follows from the one before it, leads into the one after. Simple. Eliminate anything that's confusing, a word that's confusing, an idea that's confusing, either eliminate it or rewrite it. Add colorful details. It's so different. If you were to say, hey, saw a hippie on the street. That's decent writing, but like good writing is, I saw a guy and he was wearing a tie-dye shirt. He had long curly hair. He had a joint in his hand or something. And he was a good old Berkeley hippie. It's a hell of a lot better description. It's fun. It's playful. It's funny. And then that's how we add colorful details. And then we just remove unnecessary words. So maybe you write that. And then maybe you want to just, what that I said wasn't entirely necessary. We compress it. Now we got a good sentence. 5 things, CLEAR. And so when it comes to creating a rhythm, here's what we do. We don't just write words, we write music. And this is probably what I'm about to share with you, my favorite single piece of writing advice. And it comes from a guy named Gary Provost. This was life-changing for me. I think about this every time I write a sentence. He's got this image. And he says, this sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several sentences become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It is like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. Boring. Every sentence is the same length. But now listen, I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music, the music sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes when I'm certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this. It is important. So write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences. Create a sound that pleases the reader's ear. Don't just write words, write music. And so the way that we do that is we can diversify our vernacular. One of the ways that you can improve your writing is you just think of a little chart. So you got word clarity on one side, you got word diversity on the other side. And you want words that are high in clarity and you want a lot of diversity in your writing. Super simple. And so when it comes to words to use, you can basically think of all writing as falling into 3 buckets. Words that people know and say, words that people know but don't say, and words people know but don't say. And you want to be pin drop right in the middle of words people know but don't say. That's the sweet spot, ladies and gentlemen. And so an example of that is, say that you're describing something. You could use a word like good, which is fine, but it's not very descriptive. And everyone knows this word and says this word. But then there's words that people know but don't say quite as often. Maybe a word like particular is much more descriptive than the word good. But then a lot of people, they pop into that good old thesaurus and they use a word like punticulous. That's a ridiculous thing to do. That's not what good writing is. Good writing is about being descriptive but clear. And so you want to end up in this middle spot of words people know but don't say. So simple, but if you kind of have this lens on you as you write, you'll eliminate cliches. Your writing will have a certain freshness that it didn't have before. Another example, you could have something like, you describe somebody as nice. She was nice, okay? But nice isn't nearly as descriptive as the word cordial. Cordial says so much more about what a woman would be like who you met one time at maybe a hotel or something. She was cordial. But copacetic, no one knows what that means. Do not use that word. And so many people, when they try to improve their writing, when they try to sound smart, they pop over into this words that people don't know but don't say, trying to impress an English teacher. And you know what? People just roll their eyes, put their heads back, fall asleep, throw your book away, throw your article away, and click into something else. This words that people know but don't say is how we improve our writing. And so that then is how we improve it on the level of words, but how about stories? And one of the things when it comes to stories is we can follow what I call the story roller coaster. And this is a super simple way to tell a story when you're talking or when you're writing. So what you do with the story roller coaster, you start with a setup. Things kind of go up. Hey, things are pretty good right now, right? The romantic comedy where the couple's in love, they're together. The dystopian movie where things start off, they're pretty good, that everyone's living happily, people are laughing, they're drinking, they're eating together. But then what happens in all these? The romantic comedy, they break up. We get into some conflict. In the dystopian movie, something goes wrong. Aliens invade. We lose our energy. Something happens to civilization. There's war. And then we end up with the resolution at the end. That's what you do is you kind of start off with a high. You get into lows where you create tension. You make people say, what is going to happen here? And you end up with some kind of resolution. A couple of weeks ago, I was a friend visited, and I live in Austin, Texas, and he wanted to do something that was really Texas. So we went to a town called Lockhart, a little south of Austin, and we went to a shooting range, and we were just shooting clays. And we got there at around 4:15, and we're in rural Texas, and none of us have cars, and so we Ubered down, 45-minute Uber drive. So we get down there, show up at 4:15, place closes at 5:30. And we're having a blast. And so we end up being basically the last people there. And there's a guy who is working at the shooting range. He's the last person there. And we're like, hey, we're in Lockhart. What should we try? And apparently Lockhart, known for their barbecue food. So we try calling an Uber. And Uber isn't available. Sun's going down. It's getting cold. We are stranded, ladies and gentlemen. We are stranded. We cannot get out of here. We try calling Uber, Lyft, try calling a local car service 3 hours before it shows up. We are 43 miles away from home, 7 miles away from the closest town, 8 miles away from the highway. We don't know what we're going to do. So we start walking on this dirt road. My friends are so chill about it, to their credit. We're walking down the dirt road. At this point, the sun is kissing the horizon. And we are basically right where this photo is, middle of nowhere. And this guy comes up, and I see his Ford F-150 truck, white car, from a long way away. And I look at my friends, I say, guys, we have one option here. We got to hitchhike. Got to hitchhike our way back to Austin. So he's driving up. I put out my thumb. I let him know what's up. He goes, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, I tell him the story. He's like, you guys are a bunch of idiots, in this old, Southern Texas accent. He's like, get the hell in the back of the truck. So the first time in my life, I end up hitchhiking. We end up back in Austin just due to his graciousness. And what I do in true content triangle fashion, the next day, I go write my email newsletter and I write the story. And now all these people start responding to me. Hey, that's a great story. I have all these phone calls from people who say, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe the hitchhiking story. And now, because it's in my note-taking system, I have that story saved, just like Matthew McConaughey in his diary, for the rest of my life with perfect fidelity. I talk about that seemingly infinite dirt road. I talk about how the sun was falling into the horizon. I talk about the 2x4 piece of wood that was sticking out of the truck's bed in the FX4 truck built for off-roading. These are things I won't remember in 10 years, but they're things that I remembered the day after. And so what that then helps me do, writing these ideas down, is it helps me get into fast writing. And so in school, what we do is we research first, we write second. In Write a Passage, we write first and we research second. And we can do this because actually a lot of the research happens passively. It happens in the course of our daily lives as we're living our life, as we're reading things, as we're learning. And so what FAST stands for is find, assemble, speak, and teach. And so what you do is you sort of start off and you're sort of passively finding ideas. And this really isn't research. This is just the course of living your life. And so then what you do is sort of like that Ken Burns film or the Matthew McConaughey book. You have all these ideas, all these pieces of film in the instance of Ken Burns, all of these notebooks in the instance of McConaughey, and you assemble those ideas. And then maybe you have the ideas, they're assembled, but you don't really know how they all fit together and stuff. So you start speaking, you talk in an otter, you do that 2-minute drill, and then you get to a place where you teach. And what's so magical about the word teach is it's a double entendre. It means two things. First, you teach others. That's what you do when you publish your ideas. You've done all this work to learn, and now you basically say, I have something to teach. I have something to share with the world. But then what you realize is once you teach others, other people teach you. And that then creates this loop where you end up getting smarter and you end up having access to all the information in the area of your personal monopoly in a way that creates a sustainable competitive advantage for you. And then the opposite of that is slow writing, right? We look at the syllabus, we spend all year researching, just listening to the teacher. Then maybe we do some observation at the end, and only at the end do we write after all of this time. And writing is just the last thing we do. So we don't actually have an opportunity to write some stuff down, then fill in the gaps with that research second mentality. And we never end up publishing our ideas. We never end up with the benefit of teaching others or having other people teach us. And so I say, learn to write fast. And I love this line from David Allen. He says, minute to minute, day to day, you don't have time to think. You need to have a ready thought. And so that's why we take notes. That's why we collect ideas. That's why we write things down, capture information throughout our daily lives. And the way that we then take advantage of that, we build a note-taking system. We structure our ideas by talking through the content triangle. We then record ourselves with Otter. And then we do that 2-minute drill. We set the timer. And so you can go on my site. You can see this article, read it, called Learn to Write Fast, which explains this in detail. And so in Write a Passage, what we do is every Saturday, we have a 2-hour session where every single student goes from start to finish on an article in 2 hours. Blows their mind. They realize, and you will realize, that you can write so much faster than you think. And you don't just write faster, but you realize that because you have the note-taking system, because you actually have the system, it's like the Sonos speaker. Not only is it easier to use and it looks prettier and it makes your life better, but the actual quality of the sound is so much better too. The quality of your writing improves at the same time that it becomes easier. And so once you do that, once you have a system for sharing ideas, being prolific, you got to ask a question, which is, how do you grow your audience? And all online audience growth is very simple. You just got to get people to cross the public to private bridge. So you grow your audience on public platforms and you build relationships on private ones. So let me explain what I mean by that. So public platforms that you might know, these are the open platforms that are big social media platforms, hundreds of thousands, millions of users, right? Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Hacker News, Reddit, all of those. And what you do, they're great because they give you free reach and distribution. That's where the people are. And so if you can take advantage of them, and you can use them to attract like-minded people, well, then you are in the early days of growing your audience. But the problem with them is that you can lose that audience at any time. Those platforms can can kick you off at any moment. And so what we got to do is we want to transfer people, get them to cross the public to private bridge and say, hey, we meet here. It's sort of like exchanging a business card or something. We meet here at this public, in this public area. Hey, now come over to my private platform, my email list, my texting list, maybe my personal website. And this is where we can actually build a direct relationship. And it is once you can actually reach people without algorithmic interference, that's when you really have someone in your audience. And you got to remember that just because you have attention doesn't mean you have an audience. A couple of years ago, there was a platform, big, hot Silicon Valley startups called Meerkat. And Meerkat used Twitter's social graph, that public platform, to accelerate growth for their company and to build their audience. It was a hot new startup. Everyone was using it. One day, Twitter launched a competitive app called Periscope, and instantly they shut off access to Twitter social graph. Meerkat, toast. After that, they weren't able to succeed because they didn't learn how to get people to cross that public to private bridge. A couple years before, Instagram did a hell of a good job, though. They grew fast by making it easy to post photos on Facebook and Twitter. And then what they did very crucially, though, was they made their actual app, their private platform, a destination that people wanted to visit. And so eventually, Twitter ended up cutting off the ability for Instagram photos to auto-populate in the feed. But Instagram said, you know what, that's okay because we have enough people crossing our public to private bridge. And now Instagram is worth billions and billions of dollars to Facebook. And so very tactically, what you do as a creator is this. You create value on public platforms. You send your audience to private platforms. Then you store value with your email list. And then what happens if you really do this right, and this takes a while, and this is sort of the crux of what we talk about in Rite of Passage, is how do we then build a personal monopoly? How do we become the only people who are known for doing what we do? And there's really 4 things that we do when we build a personal monopoly. We focus on things that are unusual, skills or knowledge that aren't often found together, things that are complementary, skills that reinforce each other and then amplify each other too. Skills that are experiential, gained through experience. And then skills that are specific. And the more narrow, the more niche, the better. And it's amazing watching what happens to Rite of Passage students as they figure out how to build their personal monopolies. First ever cohort that we did, a guy named Packy McCormick, coming in and super curious, excited to start writing. He comes in, here's his early website, his first website. Hi, I'm Packy. I run the Not Boring Club. You know, he sort of had the seeds of his personal monopoly when he was in the course, but he was still trying to figure it out. Read a newsletter on business strategy and pop culture. So he takes Rite of Passage and he learns all the mechanics, all the nuances of how to actually build a personal monopoly, talks to the other students in the class, and boom, voila. He now, I think, has 20,000 email subscribers. He has raised a 6-figure investment fund through his newsletter, and he has nailed the essence of his personal monopoly. Business strategy and finance, but 100% not boring. He says it's the most fun way to learn what's going on in business. And I mean, I pulled this, it says 17,600 subscribers. I probably pulled this image 6 months ago, 4 months ago, something like that. Dude is crushing it with his personal monopoly. Then there's Onlure. She's not a Rite of Passage student, but unbelievably talented. Check out her site, Nest Labs. And what she does is she focuses on the intersection of productivity, writing, and mindfulness. That is her personal monopoly. And when it comes to the global, I mean, this is the gift of the internet. Yeah, you got to deal with global competition. That's why we got to think about personal monopolies. You know, that's the curse of the internet. But man, oh man, the internet really gives you the gift of a global audience for what you do. No longer are you the blacksmith or the shoe cobbler for the town. You can be the expert in what you do for the world if you build a good personal monopoly. One of our students, Ana Lorena Fabrega, she came in and she had been a teacher for a number of years. And she said, you know what? I want to change the childhood education system. That is what I dream of doing. And she came in, she found her personal monopoly of education, kids, and games. And she's now the chief evangelist for an Elon Musk affiliated startup called Synthesis. Not a rite of passage student, but there's Julia Galef. And she has a podcast called, has one called Rationally Speaking. She's publishing a book, and her personal monopoly is the intersection of thinking, rationality, and fun. She makes thinking about thinking and actually thinking more rationally fun, as opposed to the dry tedium that we're used to in some kind of old university lecture. And then there's Jack Butcher, who runs Visualize Value, and his personal monopoly, it's got to do with design. I mean, look at how distinct these images are. They all got the same font. They're one of a kind. And he's got this personal monopoly that he talked about in the YouTube workshop that I did with him, 90 minutes long. I think now the most popular YouTube video I've ever published. Check it out. His personal monopoly is ideas, leverage, and design. And he's going to be the global go-to guy for that intersection. And he's changed his life by building a business online, giving himself leverage by focusing on this personal monopoly. And so I want to end with sort of a recap of everything that we've spoken about. You know, I'm making a radical claim here that you can learn to write and build an audience of like-minded people, and you don't have to be like Oprah. You don't need millions and millions of followers. You don't need every single person to know your name. You don't need to be somebody who hosts their own television network, has their own talk show. You don't need to be the kind of person who can't even walk down the street without people interrupting you. I mean, that sounds miserable. It sounds like a tough life. What you can do, you can pursue niche fame. You focus on this niche. You have a personal monopoly where you are, in your area of expertise, the person who is the best in the world at what you do. And look, that's going to take a while to find. A personal monopoly probably, on average, will take you 5 years to figure out. But what you do and where you will be by the time that you finish Rite of Passage, you'll be on a personal monopoly path. You will be on the path walking through to that view at the end of the trail that is beautiful in your personal monopoly, but you will then have a cadre of people you can go walk that path with. Then there's distribution, whereas traditional celebrities like McConaughey, we were talking about earlier, and a bunch of other ones, they don't own their distribution that much. They don't have really big email lists. They're kind of dependent on the media to go reach their fans. What I say is you can own your distribution. You can reach people directly. And then you're trusted. People, they don't just know you. They respect you. They have trust in you. And so you don't just have followers. You have buyers for whatever it is that you want to build, whatever it is that you want to do. And so you can use your audience to go start businesses, but then you're also trusted in terms of friends that you can make. You know, you have the fame of like a university professor where in your niche, in your area, everyone wants to talk about you, but you're relatively invisible in the real world. That sounds great. And then it's lucrative. There's long-term social and financial benefits. And I call this the perks of niche fame, which is another article on my site. And when we build niche fame, we take advantage of what John Doerr called, he says that the internet is the largest legal wealth creation tool in human history. And he doesn't mean financial wealth. He means social and personal wealth too. And so as we go about building our personal monopoly, focusing on the content triangle, writing online, becoming citizens of the internet, living our lives with hearts on fire, what should we remember? First, get going and then get good. And what that means is start writing, start walking that personal monopoly path, start living your life with a heart on fire, saying, how can I be an active and engaged member in the world of ideas? That's the first step to becoming a citizen of the internet. And then what you do is you follow the rite of passage method, which you basically break down here in 6 steps. You know, we ignore the myths of writing from scarcity, thinking in solitude, writing only for the teacher, the myth of writing clear sentences, or now learning to write clear sentences where we create a rhythm, we link our sentences, we eliminate confusion, we add color, and we delete unnecessary words. Then writing fast, we find ideas, we assemble them, we speak them out loud, then we focus on teaching. We remember that teaching is a double entendre. First you teach others, then they teach you back, and that creates your compounding loop, which gets you to a place where you are systematically thinking better, building an audience, and improving your thinking. And you do that then by implementing the content triangle, thinking of writing as a social experience and how conversation is tinder for the flame of epiphany. Then there's audience building. You actually go out, you build your own distribution, and you balance the different platforms, the open ones, the public ones like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, with the owned ones that you actually own a relationship with your audience on, like email. And then finally, we build a personal monopoly. And so we get to a place where we know that the ultimate goal of writing online is to build a personal monopoly. And in rite of passage, we get to a place where we walk that personal monopoly path. And this is what it's all about: learning to write, learning to think better, and using writing to improve your life economically, socially, to create friends, and to live a richer and more meaningful life. That's what it's all about. Thank you very much. Let's do some Q&A, everybody.
All right. First question. This is two different people asked something similar. So the main point is, what about the risks of writing online? So for example, if you write fast and you share something wrong, or somebody else pointed out that what you put on the internet lives forever. What if something comes back to bite you months, years later? How do you overcome this fear while publishing articles?
Yeah, so the first thing is, like, there's just certain hot button topics that if you're really worried about those things, just avoid them. You know what they are, and you don't need to write about them. I mean, I've never had anything like that happen. I mean, there's certain things that I've said that have been wrong, but like, I'm very happy that other people have helped me correct the way I'm thinking and actually help me think better. And writing fast isn't about being sloppy. That's really not what it's about. It's about getting to a place where you're able to assemble ideas together so that if you have 6 hours to write something, you're not spending 6 hours. Like, what's sloppy is having to spend 6 hours compiling research, trying to collect ideas and do it very frantically, and then not having time afterwards to actually edit and distill because you spend so much time. What I'm saying is write fast, get to a place where you already have those ideas, you've already done the research. And so rather than the 6 hours that you need to do here, you've actually spent hours and hours and hours passively collecting ideas over the course of your life. And then with that 6 hours, you only spend 2 hours actually writing the thing. And now, rather than feeling like you don't have time to edit, you have 4 more hours to edit. That's the opposite of sloppiness. That's the opposite of risk. And that's why we write fast. That's why we do the research away from the computer. That's why we passively collect ideas, so that we avoid these big risks. And what you get in rite of passage, and what I encourage you to do in your normal life, is maybe even to have somebody who you can have conversations with, work through ideas with, and rite of passage gives you a whole group of editors to help you make sure that, and those editors are peers, other people in the course, and you have them looking at your writing to make sure that you improve. And look, avoid the hot button topics. These things aren't real risks. And also, the internet forgets about things that aren't good. You know, one thing that's really interesting about new writers is they feel two things, which are totally contradictory. But I've now taught, hundreds of students, so I know what this is like. But new writers feel two things. It's hilarious because it makes no sense. These things can't possibly be true. The first thing is people look out and they say, oh no, what I publish, everyone's going to see, everyone's going to judge me for. And the first article I write is the most important thing I've done in my life. Oh my goodness. You know, you publish an article, your hands are shaking, your palms are sweating, your heart is beating out of your chest as you write. But then at the same time, and this is what makes no sense and it cracks me up, people say, dude, no one's reading my writing. Can you help me out? How could both of those things be true? But what I find so interesting about the craft of writing is emotionally, things can be paradoxical like that. And these are the challenges that we grapple with in Rite of Passage.
So speaking of the course, David, we just did about an hour, a little bit more. Can you talk about how the session we just did would be similar to the live sessions you'd find in Rite of Passage? How would the session we just did be different in Rite of Passage? And also, while answering, talk about who is Rite of Passage really intended for: beginners, advanced writers, and just talk about all that.
Yeah, great question. So Rite of Passage has basically, the way that we think about it is I don't present really ever for more than 15 minutes in Rite of Passage. What we do is I present, we have a lot of conversation, we have solo writing time, we actually get work done, and our live sessions are very active and dynamic. They're not passive like this. That's the first thing. The second thing is you're actually friends with everyone in the chat. You get to know people. Like, you make some of your best friends in this course. And so you have this whole world of community and friendship that comes out of the course. And then the other thing is, who's the course for? I think it's really focused on three people. I mean, the first is a certain kind of person who's intellectually isolated. And, you know, I was talking to a friend yesterday who's feeling intellectually isolated, and he's going through a tough time. He's going through a really tough time because he's really smart and he loves ideas. And maybe you feel like this. And he feels like the people that he meets just aren't able to engage with him intellectually. It's hard for him. And, you know, I felt the same thing when I started writing. That's why I started writing online. I was going to school in North Carolina, and it was a town of like 5,000 people. And I felt like it was hard to engage with people on the level of ideas. And so I turned to the internet and I just found a bunch of people who shared my passion and my enthusiasm for ideas. You know, I felt intellectually isolated. That's sort of the first bucket of students. The second is, you know, we have a lot of students who are just crushing it in their careers, and they work for a corporation and they want to level up at their company. So they're VPs and they want to go up to the C-suite, and they know that if they write online, first, they have a really good BATNA, which is a best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is one of the first things that you learn when you learn about negotiation. And what they have is, okay, now they start writing online. All these other companies are interested in their knowledge because they're actually advertising their skills by sharing ideas online. And we have a lot of people who then want to use writing online to get promotions, and then also to actually get better at their jobs in the corporate world. And then we have a bunch of people who are in the corporate world, or they are entrepreneurs themselves, and they want to go and they want to build what I call an audience first product, where you build an online audience, and you then hear from your audience what needs to be done in terms of problems in an industry, in terms of products that could be built. And you then build a product for your audience. You know, a lot of examples come to mind. Emily Weiss, who founded Glossier, you know, she runs a multi-billion-dollar company. I think she was working at Vogue magazine as an assistant editor, started her blog called Into the Gloss. And that blog ended up becoming $1 billion blog. Unbelievable. And she was able to use that for her distribution for building that company. My friend Nathan Barry, he was writing and really focused on designers. And then he was building his audience, and he said, wait, there's no really good email platforms that I like where I can reach my audience. And he went out, he started ConvertKit. It's doing more than $20-30 million in revenue. And he used his audience to recruit really talented people to get his first customers. And he thinks that ConvertKit's going to be another billion-dollar business that was catapulted by writing online. So I think if you want to make friends online and use this for your social life, which is the thing that got me into this, if you want to get to a place where you want to advance in the corporate world and do better professionally there, or if you want to start a business and become somebody who works for yourself, somebody who uses the internet to do well and to support yourself, then Rite of Passage works well too there. Will, is there anything that I missed about the student experience and how this is different?
No, I mean, I think just beyond the live sessions too, you may have mentioned this, but it's more expansive. There's a whole forum where you'll meet hundreds of other students who are curious and just fascinating people from 30, 40 different countries. There are weekly mentor sessions, 13 different mentors who are alumni who you can choose from to learn from outside of David's sessions. So there's just a lot there. We say it's like Coachella, you walk in and there's 30 different things happening. You can't do it all, and it's designed so that you can't do it all. It's just you pick and choose the best pieces, and it's a wild ride for 5 weeks.
Will, any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a few more. Depends how long we want to go here. But one question, somebody wrote that Aaron Sorkin, famed screenwriter, has said that what you want to convey appears by the time you're done writing. So can you talk about, does this apply to you, David, the way you write? How much do ideas emerge while you're writing, or do you jump into the writing process knowing exactly what you want to say?
Oh my goodness, guys. I just spent 8 months and I'm still working on this essay about the liberal arts. I would not have spent that long of time if writing didn't create more ideas than you could possibly think about when you're just thinking about something. The page is to the writer what the whiteboard is to the mathematician. And you talk to a mathematician and why are they always on the whiteboard? Because they're hard problems. And so what they do is they outsource their thinking to the whiteboard. And so what happens is it's sort of like computers. So there's really two kinds of memory on a computer, and one of them is working memory and one of them is sort of storage. And so what you get is once you put words on the page, you actually get more working memory, which then allows you to see things that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so writing, if writing is thinking, then rewriting is rethinking. And it is the process of putting words on the page and having them be static there, because words on the page, they have infinite patience. And so what we do when we write is we give ourselves an opportunity to go over and over and over again on ideas. And so I'm writing this essay because I believe so passionately about, hey, we got to save the liberal arts. But I hadn't been able to come up with the best ways to explain things, the best way to structure my ideas. It's taken me 8 months. But because of this 8-month process, I've gone so much farther than I would have thought. And once again, I've learned that writing isn't just about writing what we know. It's about beginning to realize things that we didn't know before we sat down at the page, because just like the mathematician in their whiteboard, you got the page, and that actually improves your working memory, allows you to see things in ideas that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
We got the question that we like to talk about a lot. Somebody said, how do you deal with the fact that when you're writing, you judge yourself a lot? You feel like an imposter. I think you've talked about facing this in the past, but what do you have to say today about imposter syndrome, David?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. I would say the first thing is that you, in some ways, are an imposter. And when you do ambitious and important work, you are far beyond your capabilities. So by definition, you are an imposter. If you only did things that you were ready to do in your career, you would end up doing nothing. You think Jeff Bezos knew how to run a multi-trillion-dollar company when he started Amazon? You think the Collison brothers at Stripe knew how to build a global payments company when they were growing up in Western Ireland? You think I knew how to run a writing school 5 years ago? No, total imposter. But Once you realize that everyone's an imposter, you realize that nobody's an imposter, and you realize that you have responsibility to yourself and to your friends and to the world to share ideas. Because this is how we advance as a culture. This is how we advance as a civilization. We stand on the shoulders of the people who have come before us. We take ideas that other people have had and we build upon them. We improve upon them. You know, it is Edison's invention of the light bulb, which then leads into the light that is shining right here, the lens that is pointing into my face right now, the computer that you're looking at. And so why is it that in the world of technology, we see it as so obvious that we have a duty, we have a responsibility to build on the work of other people. But then when it comes to writing, we say, oh, I need ideas to be 100% original. I can't actually stand upon the shoulders of the people who've come before us. I'm just an imposter. No scientist would ever say that, but why do writers say that? You have a duty as a creator and as a citizen of human life to basically take the ideas that you learn, to share them with others, and to actually add to the map of human knowledge. That is how you contribute to the people who've come before you and to the children and your grandchildren who are going to come right after you. And so I say, get rid of being an imposter, focus on your duty, and share ideas with the world. That is what we are here for. What a magical calling. That's why I loathe this imposter syndrome point. You're not realizing what you could become.
Amen, brother. I think that's it. Let's end there. Perfect place to end. Thanks everyone for attending. Again, hope to see you in the course. David, I'll let you close us out.
Join us and write a passage. This is what it's like for 5 weeks. And thank you for being here today. I'll see you soon, everybody.